Born into slavery in 1818 and raised on a Maryland plantation under brutal conditions, Frederick Douglass hardly seemed destined for greatness. But against all odds, he became a world-renowned orator, journalist, best-selling author, and advisor to U.S. presidents. Many contemporaries found it hard to believe that a man so brilliant and well-spoken could be a fugitive slave with no formal education. Yet Douglass's background helped him to inspire people to fight injustice. From the thrilling stories of Douglass's attempted escapes to the many controversies and seminal events in U.S. history in which he was involved, David A. Adler has written an absorbing account of a dynamic leader. An American classic rediscovered by each generation, The Story of My Life is Helen Keller's account of her triumph over deafness and blindness. Popularized by the stage play and movie The Miracle Worker, Keller's story has become a symbol of hope for people all over the world. This book, published when Keller was only 22, portrays the wild child who was locked in the dark and silent prison of her own body. With an extraordinary sense of immediacy, Keller reveals her frustrations and rage and takes the reader on the unforgettable journey of her education and breakthroughs into the world of communication. We see Keller as she finally realizes that her teacher's finger-spelled letters mean water. Suddenly, that living word awakened my soul, gave it light, hope, joy, set it free. An unparalleled chronicle of courage, The Story of My Life remains startlingly fresh and vital nearly a century after its first publication, a timeless testament to an indomitable will. On March 2, 1955, a slim, bespectacled teenager refused to give up her seat to a white woman on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Shouting, "It's my constitutional right," as police dragged her off to jail, Claudette Colvin decided she'd had enough of the Jim Crow segregation laws that had angered and puzzled her since she was a young child. But instead of being celebrated, as Rosa Parks would be when she took the same stand 9 months later, Claudette found herself shunned by many of her classmates and dismissed as an unfit role model by the black leaders of Montgomery. Undaunted, she put her life in danger a year later when she dared to challenge segregationists yet again, as one of 4 plaintiffs in the landmark busing case, Browder v. Gale. Based on extensive interviews with Claudette Colvin and many others, Philip Hoos presents the first in-depth account of a major yet little-known civil rights figure whose story provides a fresh perspective on the Montgomery bus protest of 1955 to 56. Historic figures like Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks play important roles, but center stage belongs to the brave, bookish girl whose 2 acts of courage were to affect the course of American history. Born a slave in 1862, Ida B. Wells went on to become one of our nation's earliest civil rights leaders. She helped found the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, and fought for women's voting rights. In 1892, Ida began a crusade that would prove to be her main life's work. Through her writing and her speaking engagements, she carried out a national campaign against the intolerable practice of lynching, the hanging, burning, or shooting of a person without a trial. Her outspokenness put her in grave danger time and time again, but Ida would not be silenced. By the time of her death in 1931, lynching in the United States had disappeared almost entirely, due largely to her efforts. Here, Dennis and Judith Frayden thoughtfully recount the achievements of Ida B. Wells, the spiritual mother of the civil rights movement, bringing this strong and intelligent woman vividly to life. Striking archival photographs and prints appear throughout this well-researched and accessible book.
As a 14-year-old, he was Malcolm Little, the president of his class and a top student. At 16, he was hustling tips at a Boston nightclub. In Harlem, he was known as Detroit Red, a slick street operator. At 19, he was back in Boston, leading a gang of burglars. At 20, he was in prison. It was in prison that Malcolm Little started the journey that would lead him to adopt the name Malcolm X, and there he developed his beliefs about what being black means in America. Beliefs that shook America then and still shake America today. When Mrs. Rosa Parks boarded that bus in Montgomery, Alabama on that December afternoon in 1955, she sparked a revolution that would transform America. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, her refusal to cooperate with racism on that historic day was based on her personal sense of dignity and self-respect. By the accumulated indignities of days gone by and the boundless aspirations of generations yet unborn. For a long time, there has been a need for such books that illuminate the civil rights struggle. In these pages, Mrs. Parks has movingly evoked the experiences and influences that shaped her formative years, the events that led to her appointment with history and her unrelenting faith. Here, in her own words, is the story of one of America's greatest freedom fighters.
At a convention in Seneca Falls, New York, on July 19, 1848, Elizabeth Cady Stanton proclaimed, "It is the duty of the women of this country to secure to themselves their sacred right to the elective franchise." Her speech, the Declaration of Rights and Sentiments, called for freedom and equality for women. She argued that women could only attain their inalienable rights through fighting for and winning the right to vote. Her controversial, radical ideas sparked a fight that would last for 72 years, the struggle for women's suffrage in America. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Women's Liberty provides young readers with a vivid portrait of the life and work of one of the premier figures in the women's suffrage movement. From her childhood encounters with sexism to her last letters to President Theodore Roosevelt asking support of the 19th Amendment, this volume relieves Cady Stanton's lifelong struggle to obtain equality for women. Excerpts from her speeches and writings are beautifully woven into the text, along with rare photographs of her and her contemporaries, making this volume the most complete biography of Cady Stanton available for young adults. Malala Yousafzai was only 10 years old when the Taliban took control of her region. They said music was a crime. They said women weren't allowed to go to the market. They said girls couldn't go to school. Raised in a once peaceful area of Pakistan transformed by terrorism, Malala was taught to stand up for what she believes in, so she fought for her rights to be educated. And on October 9, 2012, she nearly lost her life for the cause. She was shot point blank while riding the bus on her way home from school. No one expected her to survive. Now she is an international symbol of peaceful protest and the youngest ever Nobel Peace Prize nominee. In this young reader's edition of her best-selling memoir, which includes exclusive photos and material, we hear firsthand the remarkable story of a girl who knew from a young age that she wanted to change the world and did. Malala's powerful story will open your eyes to another world and will make you believe in hope, truth, miracles, and the possibility that one person, one young person, can inspire change in her community and beyond. Born into privilege, Jane Addams, 1860 to 1935, chose to pursue a life of humanitarian efforts that extended the world over. In Chicago's 19th Ward, a community of poor immigrants, she established Hull House, one of the earliest settlement houses in the United States. In her later years, Addams was an ardent suffragist and civil rights activist, and she helped to found both the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People and the American Civil Liberties Union. But it was Jane Addams's work as a pacifist that put her into the international spotlight. Although many labeled her unpatriotic for her pacifist activities, she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1931, and at the time of her death, she was one of the most respected and admired women in the world. Drawing upon hundreds of historical documents and archival photographs, Judith Bloom Frayden and Dennis Brindle Frayden offer an inspiring portrait of this remarkable woman whose very way of life made her an American icon. Ida Minerva Tarbell, 1857 to 1944, was a pioneer among journalists. Before exposés were routine, she wrote a series of magazine articles detailing the shady business practices of John D. Rockefeller, head of the powerful conglomerate called the Standard Oil Trust. Ida's articles and the public uproar they aroused resulted in legislation against trusts and in government regulation of business in general. Her work made history beyond the history of journalism. Intelligent, curious, and determined to succeed, Ida rose to prominence, becoming known as the most famous woman in America, in an era when women had few options and no rights. Her story is a panorama of American life at the turn of the 20th century, including politics, the women's suffrage movement, the economy, big business, the role of printed periodicals in informing public opinion, the literary landscape, and important people in all those areas. At the heart of the story are Ida's turbulent roller coaster years at McClure's magazine and the groundbreaking work she did there. From her childhood in oil country to her pinnacle of fame to her later years as a recognized authority on almost everything, Ida is revealed as a fascinating and complex person, quirky, opinionated, reserved, adventurous, independent, a woman making her way in a man's world.